Hey, welcome to the Rocket and Raygun Awards for the decade. I don't know who suggested this in one of our EP live streams or somebody tweeted at me or something like that, but they said, look, this year you need to do a Best of the Decade Awards, and you are absolutely correct. We need to do that. It is the end of this previous 10 years of fantastic video game entertainment, and we've got a brand new category to get into today. It is the Best Indie Game of the Decade. Now, before we give you our nominees and our winner, let's hear from the community.
Best indie game of the decade. Adam, what would you say was the best indie game of the decade?
Oh, let me just scoop this right here. Shovel Knight is not our selection for best game of the decade. Shovel Knight is a fantastic game.
A wonderful game.
Yes, but another game kind of came out of almost nowhere, stole our hearts for sure, and that game is Cuphead.
Yeah, look folks, Cuphead is a phenomenal game. You've got amazing graphics and animation style that you just don't see in any other game.
Yeah, and it took a lot of things that we expected from video games and brought it into a whole different realm, especially visually. We weren't expecting that at all.
Yeah, now the thing is, when you look at the game, you probably think it's all about its visuals, but I would argue that it actually has great gameplay as well. Problem is, it's really hard and it's really challenging.
Is that a problem?
No, because I think if you play it long enough, you start to enjoy it even more. You've got the easy game mode and the bit more difficult mode, and honestly, it all comes together to be a very satisfying experience with just amazing visuals.
Absolutely.
Our nomination for Best Indie Game of the Decade is 2017's Cuphead. From the art style, to the boss mechanics, to even the music, I think that they really took the indie scene by storm.
I mean, it's not an easy game. It's a really freaking hard game.
But rewarding.
I almost find it harder playing with somebody. You know, you think when you play co-op, okay, well, we can bang this out together.
But they
it's really not.
It very well.
Yeah. It's a great game.
I'm choosing Cuphead. Not only that it looks absolutely phenomenal with its animation style, it's reminiscent of old Fleischer cartoons from the 1920s and 30s, but it controls extremely well, and it's very reminiscent of those old school run and gun games like Contra, Metal Slug, or more importantly Gunstar Heroes. I just enjoyed just beating every single one of those bosses, and yes, the game kicked my butt, but I came back for more, and that's a testament for a really tight game design.
I could talk about independent video games forever. This last decade has been awesome for indies, and I'm going to talk about two. My runner-up is going to be The Witness. It is such a masterclass of design. I have no idea how Jonathan Blow didn't blow his own brains out designing that game. The layers upon layers are just so crazy. But my favorite independent game of the decade has to go to Celeste. Celeste is a rare example of a perfect video game. You've got perfect controls, a perfect art style that suits the game perfectly. You've got perfect music, perfect sound, even the way the characters talk to each other, and a perfectly emotional and great well-told story that hits on really interesting themes. And so for that reason and so many more, that is why Celeste is my favorite independent game of the decade.
This might be the most challenging choose one I've ever had to do, but I really feel like Celeste is the one that does something more than just be a video game. It blends story, it blends gameplay, it blends emotion and feeling into one experience that everybody can relate to. And when you finally get to the top of the mountain at the end, it is a very special emotional moment for you, for the characters in the game, and for every single person that you want to tell to play this game, because they are missing out.
I gotta give the nod to Inside. That game got its hooks on me early on and never let me go to the crazy end. I didn't even get the true ending, which I still have to dive back in and do that. It's so dark and so noir and so bizarre. It's my kind of jam, and I loved it.
My indie game of the decade is easily Inside. There's no pop-ups, there's no dialogue telling you what to do, there's no story set up as you go in. You're just left to survive, and to survive you just have to keep moving. And the further you get through the game, the more puzzles you solve, the crazier the game gets and more disturbing and unsettling it gets. That at some point you're almost thinking like, should I just stop? Because like it's just getting a little heavy by the time you get to the end of the game.
If I had to pick just one game to stand out above all the others, it's Fez. Because it has one of the best game mechanics. You change the perspective of the game, and that changes the layout of the level. There's not many people or developers that have been able to achieve something like that.
Shovel Knight is my favorite one, and it's because this game takes a lot of aesthetics from classic games that I really liked and still enjoy to this day, and brings them all together into one mega game. There are so many different DLC packs for this game that you can just buy under the umbrella of the treasure trove, and each game is a full game with different stages, different bosses. This feels like it could have been an NES game, you know, maybe one of those later NES games where developers really figured out the system and started pushing the graphics to the next level.
This is a tough one for me. I friggin' love indie games. I love studios that come out of nowhere and provide you with so much joy, and that's exactly what Journey did. It gives you time to breathe. It gives you these moments that are so magical that you want to hold on to them and just kind of extend the experience for as long as you possibly can.
My Rocket and Raygun indie game of the decade is Journey.
Journey is one of those once in a lifetime, once in a decade kind of experiences where you sit down and you play this thing in one fell swoop and you go through and you run into other characters and you try to decipher what's happening in this land, and we couldn't talk to each other, but we could communicate and jump and make it up. And you think you're playing with the same people, and you get to the end, you see the list of all the people we played with. You get into the mountaintop, it gets all snowy, you're like, is he gonna die? What's gonna happen out here? Journey in what, 2 hours or whatever, brings out more emotions than most games that you play for 40 hours. Journey is insane, and it changed the way we looked at indie games.
I am going to give my my vote to it's just such a joy to play, and you can play it over and over again. I loved that game company's Journey. I just thought what it did with multiplayer really shook gaming at the time. I mean, everybody was talking about talking to players and having keyboards and chats and headsets and whatever. And the anonymity in Journey, the fact that you never can really speak to any of the players that you ever meet on the road, was just so cool. There was such a sense of mystery to that.
I have to give it to Journey because there was no experience like Journey. There was one of those games where I was just so captivated, and I was, I didn't understand what was going on, but the beauty of just walking through the desert and experiencing this short but sweet story was magical. And I think Journey was one of those titles that, I don't want to say made me start looking at indie games seriously, but made me understand the beauty of indie games. The fact that there were these experiences that a lot of big publishers are afraid to take risks with. Like a lot of, we see big companies now, they always have to play with this formula where they got to make sure that they make all their money back, whereas it's always the indie developers that are taking these huge strides and taking these big risks with titles that are just out of this world, and Journey was exactly that, and it's 100% my indie game of the decade.
Okay, now it's time for our nominees. The best indie game of the decade. Here we go. Journey from 2015. Cuphead from 2017. Shovel Knight from 2014, Inside from 2016, and Celeste from 2018. Let's talk about Shovel Knight here. This is a game that became a sensation across the video game industry. Yacht Club Games said, look, it's still incredibly important for us to make titles that feel like classic 8-bit side-scrolling action adventures like Mega Man, but let's switch it up and throw in some really cool fantasy sort of role-playing game story bits into this, and let's make a hero out of a knight that packs around a shovel and has all kinds of mechanics based around that. It's a crazy concept, all of it, all of those pieces, but they made it work, and they made this airtight in terms of play. Fantastic characters, great storytelling, just absolutely wonderful. And I love the fact that this quirky indie title, this crazy creation, I've got an amiibo, and he pops up into Super Smash Brothers every once in a while. Just amazing. So congratulations for that nomination. Let's talk a little bit about Cuphead, which blew our minds when it came out in 2017 on the Xbox One. This looks like a 1930s cartoon. That was the concept. Another crazy idea, especially for a small independent team to kind of put the muscle together to be able to make this flow and work. And then the gameplay kind of fell into place, and we realized that this game, as gorgeous as it is also unbelievably difficult difficult and challenging, you feel like such a champion to defeat any level in the title. Cuphead is definitely one of the best indie games of the last decade. Another fantastic indie title was 2018's Celeste, which won numerous awards and lots of recognition. A wonderful platformer with a fantastic message, just perfect mechanics, and also a forgiving kind of statement as well, because the game really acknowledges that in order to progress through it, you need to fail a lot, and you need to kind of come to grips with those failures. And it's such a wonderful game that treats the player with so much respect, coupled with beautiful production values and an incredible musical score. This is a wonderful game and absolutely one of the best indies of the last 10 years. We're also tipping our hats to the fine folks at Play Dead, who took our breath away with Limbo, but then completely blew our minds out of our skulls with Inside. And I don't even want to spoil it now. It's come out years ago, but I don't even want to talk about the ending now. But the game completely shocks and surprises you by the time you defeat everything, by the time you get to the end. There's some horrific imagery. It's stark, creates a sense of anxiety as you're playing it, but also the idea of what's around the next corner. That mystery is so pervasive and so wonderfully kept all the way throughout the game. And that's why Inside has made the list as one of the best indie titles of the last 10 years. Now, the game that we're going to give the award to, Journey, which came out in 2015. And Journey was a game about connection and also exploration and working out mysteries. And it was so, it was about sort of dealing with the loneliness of you being a singular entity out in this vast, vast world. And the mobility that you had was absolutely wonderful. But then the introduction of another character that you didn't know who was playing it on the other end was such a marvelous idea. And it was about kind of working together and coming together to tackle these moments. And it wasn't about crazy action. It wasn't about your button press timing. It was about connection and experience and just sort of floating through this ethereal, beautiful landscape that game company put together. I place great value in titles that are kind of genre busting and less about trying to one-up hardcore competition that exists out there. I love all of that stuff too. But I think it's really marvelous when you can put a game like Journey or Flower, and there's lots of other titles that you guys could list out as well, in front of anyone, and they will get something from it. There's an emotional impact from that. Journey is exceptional, and it is absolutely our best indie game from the last decade. Okay, you guys, we have tons of other categories that we're diving into, both for the last decade, but also for 2019. So make sure you check out all of our Rocket and Raygun Award videos.